All right, good morning, everybody. It is so good to see you all here. There's so many familiar faces here. I didn't know how many familiar faces we'd see here, and so it's so fun to be here and to see you all. We're really excited to be here because we love stories. We see story as being such an important part of who we are, and God really, really writes a story for each of us. And we've learned over the past years that sharing our stories well and then listening and connecting with other stories is a huge way to be able to share the gospel and to share Jesus. And so we're excited today. We get to share a little bit of our story of what's happened to us over the last, couple of years now, and share that with you today. So we'll start with, I guess I should introduce my family. That was a mistake. But again, I'm Brad Nelson. This is Julie. And then these are our kids up here. And we got to leave them at their home church at Parkside, which is pretty exciting. They haven't been there for like 6 weeks, and so they're excited to go to their home church today. But Jaron is our oldest. He's 13. And then Clive is 10. And then Eleanor is 4. And if she was here and I didn't say 4.5, she'd be mad at me. So she's 4.5. But yeah. So anyways, that's our family.
We really think it's neat how God gives each of us a unique story. And while Brad and I's stories started out similar, we were both raised in Christian homes that taught us about Jesus at a young age. The way that we got from there to going overseas on the mission field, our story was very different for each of us. And so we think it's really neat how God can use unique stories. So we just hope that our story today will encourage you no matter where you are in your unique journey. So, starting off, my story actually started when I was about in 3rd or 4th grade. There's a picture of me, 3rd and 4th grade. I thought a few of you would enjoy that. So, this was me after an Awana event that I got a ribbon for. But my story started out sitting in my church basement, listening to the Bible teacher talk about the story of Amy Carmichael. And Amy Carmichael was a missionary to India, and I remember being really inspired by her story, even at a young age. And I remember thinking, maybe that's what God might want me to do someday. So I didn't leave that night deciding to be a missionary, but God used different parts of my story and different parts of my life to guide me on that way. But that was the first time I remember. Another time in high school, I remember everybody around me knew what they wanted to do. And so they'd ask me, Julie, what do you want to be when you grow up? And let me tell you, I had a lot of interests, and they all sounded really great. I mean, one of my friends wanted to be a dolphin trainer. Sign me up, right? Then there was like a singer in a rock band. Absolutely. Maybe a tap dancer. Sure. And a teacher. I really loved the idea of teaching kids too. And so they all sounded really great, but none of them really stood out as exactly what I was made for. And then I remember reading a missionary biography again in high school and getting that nudge again in my spirit that that's what God wanted me to do. And I remember sitting in my backyard just really struggling with that in high school about the idea of giving up my life and going overseas. But eventually I decided, okay, it was time. And that's what brought me to Crown College. And so I went to Crown College for intercultural studies, and that's where I met my husband, Brad.
Yeah, actually, we're on the way here. We're talking. We've been married now after graduating from Crown for almost 20 years. Not quite 20 years, but closer to 20 than 15, or to 10. Yeah, so 16 years. Anyway, it was a long time ago, so we're really old. Anyway, so my calling started really actually as I was a student at Crown. My freshman year at Crown, I had a roommate who was an intercultural studies major, studying to be a missionary, was passionate about it. And he was one of those guys, he literally couldn't talk about anything other than missions. But I loved talking about it with him, and I thought, this is so cool. And sharing Jesus overseas just sounds like an awesome idea for somebody else. I'm like, that's really cool, and I will support missions. I totally felt called to support missions. I was like, I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to give some of it to missions. This sounds good. But my junior year at Crown, we had a missions fest, and the speakers there just connected with me, and God really used them to give me a different call. And I felt him saying, Brad, I don't want you just to support missions. I want you to go. And I still did not want to go. I was like, that's scary. But when God calls you to something, you go, right? You say, yes, God. And so I said, yeah, God, I'll go. So I changed my major to intercultural studies, fully dived into that, but really out of obligation. It wasn't out of a heart of passion for it. Julie, like I said, Julie and I, we graduated, we got married, and realized we had a lot of college debt. And so we started paying that off. And we realized it was going to take a while. In my back of my mind, it was kind of nice because it was a little bit of an excuse to be here still. I still got my American dream while I was paying off debt. Yeah, exactly, right? That's kind of ironic. But here we were working in jobs. At first, just anything we could do, and then we ended up landing in these jobs that we loved. Like Roger said, I was at Crown, and working a missional job really felt like that was part of the mission, as getting students to a Christian college and then sending them out. Julie was at Parkside as a children's director, and we thought, like, this is where God wants us. He has us here for a reason. But then things started to change. My job at Crown started changing, and it made me start thinking maybe God wanted me to do something else. And so I love Christian higher ed. I love Crown, and so I started looking at other Christian higher ed jobs that were in my field. And each one I looked at was taking us a little bit further and further and away from home. And I kept saying, Julie, what about here? And what about here? And what about here?
I sensed a problem. I loved my job at Parkside, absolutely loved it. And I saw myself as teaching these children. And you betcha I taught Amy Carmichael, and you betcha I taught lots of missionary stories to these kids. And I really loved where I was at. And at this point in time, I had figured that Brad had kind of given up on the idea of missions. I hoped that maybe one day when our children were grown, that would change. But for now, I thought he had no desire to go. And so, out of desperation to stay where I was at, I said to him, if we're going to move out of state, why wouldn't we look overseas? What I meant was, if you're going to rip me away from this place, you better be prepared to move overseas, or I'm not moving. But the joke was on me.
That's funny because I did not take it as a joke, right? I didn't think of anything like she was calling my bluff. But when she said those words, like God spoke into my life in a new way that I had never experienced before. I had felt called to go overseas. I said yes out of obligation. But now God was finally filling me with this excitement and passion and just having my heart broken for people that don't know Jesus. And so this new passion started filling up. And as we started thinking about that and praying, we started asking God for direction and speaking to us. But listening can be really hard, right? Like hearing God's voice isn't always easy. And so here we were trying to listen to God, and there's so many distractions, so much noise in our lives. And we really realized that if we're going to hear from God, we got to really intentionally listen to God. And so one Bible story that we came across during this time really spoke to kind of our situation. So I'm going to read that story to us. It's in 1 Samuel 3, and I'll read here. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me?" But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. And the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me?" But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me?" Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears."
I love the story of Samuel because I think it's a great illustration of how God speaks to everyone, including children. But what I find interesting about the story is that Samuel did hear the voice of the Lord the first time. Did you catch that? He heard him. And yet, it wasn't until Eli finally was able to, God called him 4 times before he actually gave him the message. So I find it interesting that he heard him the first time. And how many times do we hear God, but we just kind of keep going on our way? So God called him 4 times and made sure that he was intentionally listening before he told him the message he had for him. How many of you parents can understand this a little bit? Like, how many times do we have to call our kids usually before they come? Yeah, a few times, right? Probably 4. But I'm thinking, okay, if I'm God and I knew that Samuel heard me, I might just keep talking. But that's not what God did. And sometimes I think we need to take a lesson from the story of Samuel. And when we think we hear the Lord, or we need to hear the Lord, or we're crying out for his voice, we need to take time to just be still and intentionally, purposefully listen for his voice.
So as we started to really intentionally listen to God and seek him for this direction, one thing that surprised us was we really started feeling convicted. And here we were asking God if he was leading us to go be missionaries. And we realized that even though we were working in missional jobs and talked about Jesus freely and openly, pretty much on a daily basis with people, we weren't always taking every advantage that we could to share Jesus. And so we really started feeling that conviction to be able to share Jesus with our neighbors and our friends who don't know Jesus. And so we started really asking God to open up opportunities to do that. And God started to do that. And we also asked for boldness to act on that. Because sometimes it's really hard to act on that, especially with maybe somebody that you have known for a long time and have never shared the gospel with.
It was amazing once we asked for this opportunity that all of a sudden these different things started coming out. People started coming out of the woodwork. We were like, wait a second, we've seen them a million times. And then all of a sudden we have this opportunity to share Christ with them. And this was both exciting to us, but also heartbreaking. Why didn't we ask for this sooner? Why weren't we looking for these opportunities all along? And now, what are we doing? We're leaving these people that we've grown to love and we've been sharing with. And who's going to take our place in sharing Jesus with these people who have not yet come to know him? And we hope it'll be you. We hope that each one of you knows a person or many people in your life that know Jesus, that need Jesus. Something we hear constantly from people who don't necessarily agree with missions is, why would you go to Japan? There's so many needs here in the U.S. And every time they say that, our heart does kind of twinge because we know there's so many people here that do need Jesus. And so we challenge you that you would be part of the Great Commission here and that you would be taking up the cause for Christ here and that you'd be seizing those opportunities and asking the Lord for boldness and for opportunities to share him.
So as God was really breaking our heart for the lost people, he was breaking our heart still for the lost people overseas as well. And as we were really seeking to hear his voice, we really felt like we did, but we wanted confirmation. And so we asked God for confirmation. And he gave us quite a few big and small different things that really confirmed this call in our lives. Julie's going to share one story with us.
We like to share lots of stories, but we don't have time. So one story for you. Our 10-year-old Clive is known for reading far above his level. He loves to pull down a random book from the shelf and just start reading. And sometimes I'm like, should he be reading that? I'm not sure, okay? So he one day pulled down My Utmost for His Highest and brought it over to me and said, Mom, look. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, that's a devotional that it's Oswald Chambers, and it has the different days on the top of each devotional. So there's a devotional for every day of the year. And so he brought it over to me, and he's like, hey, Mom, let's read the devotional. So this was a particular week, by the way, that we were struggling with this idea early on. And I was particularly struggling with the idea of leaving our home and everything we knew. And he brought this devotional over to me and said, let's, look at the devotional for the day. So this random day, August 17, we turned to the devotional of the day. And it's the story of the rich young ruler from Luke 18. And the rich young ruler comes up to Jesus and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, you know the commandments. He said, oh yeah, all of those I've kept since I was a boy. And he said, one thing you lack. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then come, follow me. This is the devotional my son hands me. And Oswald Chambers in the devotional says, have you ever heard the master say a hard word? If you have not, I question whether you have heard him say anything. Jesus Christ says a great deal that we listen to but do not hear. When we do hear, his words are amazingly hard. So, of course, in children's director fashion, I decided I needed to explain this to my sons. And I said, we do a lot for God. We go to church, we read our Bibles, we try to share Jesus with people. Daddy and I both work in ministry, and we could probably say, like the rich young ruler, all this we have done. But what does Jesus say to him? One thing you lack. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor. So I look at my kids and I say, what do you think God wants us to do? And they're like, I guess he wants us to move to Japan. This random devotional on this random of days. Okay, Lord, I'm listening.
So we really felt like God was giving us confirmation. And so as we were really searching for opportunities, we were overwhelmed. There are so many awesome opportunities to go serve overseas, both with the Christian Missionary Alliance and with other denominations. And so we started looking, and we read an opportunity. We're like, yeah, that sounds really good, but it doesn't feel right. And we did that over and over again, and then came across an opportunity for Japan. And I said to Julie, what about Japan? And Julie had always felt called to Asia, and she was like, yeah, let's check it out. And so I read this ministry opportunity. And as I read it, we both were like, this was written for us. All these jobs that we've had, these ministries that we've jumped into and helped out with, youth group and children's ministry and mentoring and college students and teaching ESL, all these different things that we've done that we thought, we're just going to do while we're here, were exactly the things that God was using to prepare us for this opportunity. And so it was so cool to see this opportunity that was just written for our lives. So I'm going to share a little bit about Envision. And you guys are familiar with the Missionary Alliance, Christian Missionary Alliance, and the different branches of missions, I assume. So there's 4 different branches of Alliance missions. We've got Access, which is kind of your traditional church planters. We've got Marketplace Ministry, which uses just their jobs as ways to go in and share Jesus. And then there's Comma Services that does relief and aid stuff across the world as well. We're going to be working with Envision, and Envision's role is to identify and then develop missional leaders. So those things that we were passionate about even while we were here, getting kids like Julie excited about missions, those are the things that we get to do with Envision. And Envision does that through 3 really main things. The first is through short-term missions trips. How many of you guys have been on a short-term missions trip? Raise your hand. Wow, that's a lot. That's I would say the largest percentage of the churches that we've been to, at least recently. So you guys know who have gone, how life-changing a short-term missions trip is. To go and see a whole different need that you've never experienced, and to see an emptiness and a lack for those who've never heard Jesus, and then to meet those Christians who are there and worship the same Jesus there in their culture as in our culture, is life-changing, right? And so we hope to be able to help people change their lives for Jesus through those. We hope that someday maybe Living Rock would bring a group to Sendai in Japan to serve there with us. We're excited for that. So that's one way. The second way is through internships. And this has been a really cool growing development in the Alliance, is pushing young people, mostly young people, although not all young people, a lot of older people too, to do these internships. And they can be anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. And they're just opportunities for people to come go overseas and get real life experience as a missionary, and it's just a really cool opportunity to get really developed and spent time doing that. One thing we realized too with this, we've got 3 kids, and we're going to be developing or mentoring and building into these lives of young people. But we realize these young people who are passionate about missions and passionate about Jesus are then going to be able to build into our kids' lives too. And we were super excited when we realized that. It was so cool. And then the third thing is this through local ministries. So there's 23 different Envision sites across the world, and each site has their own unique ministry. The site in Taipei, Taiwan, has a coffee shop. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Aroma Cafe. They're started by people here locally. The site in the Philippines has an at-risk youth ministry. And so each site kind of goes and figures out what is the need here amongst the people and how can we meet that, and then they do that. And that's a big ministry that gets to help people to hear about the hope of Jesus.
So, why start an Envision site in Japan? One of the first things we learned about Japan is that less than 1% claim to know Christ. This is really shocking because not only are there are other countries with around that same percentage, but Japan is the only country that has freedom of religion and is still sitting at less than 1%. So the harvest is huge and the need for workers is really big. And so that's why one of the reasons we're really excited to go. Another thing that we keep hearing that has impressed us about the Japanese culture is how kind, considerate, and hardworking the Japanese are. Over and over we hear this, whether in-person testimonies or written testimonies. They simply care for the group. They're constantly trying to do what is right. And this is reflected even in their crime rate, which is extremely low even in large cities. However, their suicide rate is extremely high. And the sobering fact is that while they spend their lives trying to do good, it's not good enough. And the Apostle Paul tells us to not grow weary in doing good. But how many of you can attest that you need Jesus for that, right? Can you imagine trying to do good all the time without him filling you up first? I can't imagine it. And so there's this sense of obligation to do what is right constantly, and there's a lot of shame associated with making mistakes or not working hard enough. And so the Japanese are growing weary, and that's why they have a really high suicide rate. So that really breaks our hearts. And when we see the statistics about how many know Christ and how many die each day, because not only from suicide, but also from having an aging population, the sobering fact is that 38,000 Japanese die every day without knowing the hope of Christ. So that really breaks our hearts, and it's a huge need, and we're excited to get over there.
It does break our hearts. If you go to the next slide, this is some fun statistics, and if you guys are real quick at math, you'll see. So we've got, I'm just going to go through the people, right? So almost 127 million people live in Japan. You see the next line that says Buddhist followers, 87 million, and the next one's 84 million. I don't know, for those of you who are good at math, does that add up to 127 million? No, that doesn't add up, and that doesn't even include the Christians at the bottom. One of the interesting things that we've learned over the years, or over the last couple of years, is that the Japanese people don't really have a lot of religious ties. So they might say they're Buddhist and they're Shinto. They might even say they're Christian, because really to them it's all about rituals. So most Japanese people will do like a Buddhist, or a Shinto birthing ritual at the beginning of life, and then a Buddhist funeral at the end of life. And they might even do a Christian wedding, which has become really popular. But again, religion there comes down often to just doing rituals, right? They just go and do the rituals because they're trying to gain favor, add a little luck to their lives, things like that. But they don't understand what they're missing because they don't have that hope of Jesus in their lives, which, again, is also heartbreaking. But there is hope. It's been really encouraging to connect with the alliance workers who are already in the area that we're going to. And there's other Christian ministries there as well. We just haven't been able to connect with many of them. But there's a lot of really good stuff happening in Japan right now. It's really interesting. The Japanese people are very intrigued by American culture, which includes learning English. And one thing that the workers there have experienced is just by building relationships, they can invite them in for a Bible study because they're really intrigued in learning English. And so they'll come and they'll go join a Bible study just for that reason, and then they meet Jesus. And they've had a lot of fruit from that. They're doing other things like even a surfing ministry. Just building into their lives and relationships has been really good for them to grow. But some of the things that we're hoping to do there when we go. So Sendai is the city that we're going to. It's about 4 hours north of Tokyo, and it's known to be a college town. And so it's kind of cool. I worked at a college for almost 10 years, and I'm passionate about college students. And here we're going to a city that's a university city. And college time for students in Japan is one of their most free and flexible times in their lives. They work so hard through their primary and secondary school to pass their tests to get into college that they just don't have time and flexibility. And then their careers are so grueling that they, again, don't have time. But college actually gives them a little bit of flexibility with their time, but more importantly, flexibility with just new ideas and new concepts. That's one of the areas that they're seeing a lot of potential for growth in Christianity in the area. And so we're excited to join in there and do some work with college students.
Since the Japanese men often work late into the evening, we also see a great opportunity for women and children after school. And so we're hoping to also be able to do something maybe like a MOPS group for even moms who are home with young preschoolers, or a children's ministry type of thing after school. So really excited for those opportunities. We also have lots of other ideas, but we'll be developing those as we're there. Our first year will be full-time language study, so during that we can have time to kind of see what the needs are. The other thing we're really excited about is Envision's opportunity to be a hub between all the Christian ministries in Japan. And so we'll actually be working with any Christian ministry that is in the area. And we're really excited about that because we can actually help them identify needs that they have in their ministry and then actually bring in short-term teams and interns to help them that have experience in their field. So we're really excited to be able to just kind of partner with whoever we can over there to put all of our eggs in one basket and just really try to work together to win lives for Christ.
One brief side note. So Christianity has been in Japan for almost 500 years, but for most of that time, it's been pretty much non-existent because early on, the fighting between the Catholics and the Protestants was so bad, it turned the Japanese people off completely. They're like, we don't want any of this, and they kicked all the Christians out. And so that's why we're really excited to just build some unity amongst the Christian ministries there. But that leads us to what are we doing now? So Julie and I, if we would have been giving this talk a year ago, we would have been telling you, we're excited, we're wrapping up our jobs, and we're doing training this summer, and then we're going in September. So that was the plan. We were going to go in September, and then, coronavirus happened, and COVID's just kind of killed everything. And so we're stuck here still in the States, and we've been here. We thought we'd be there in September, and we're still here at least through February and maybe longer, still waiting on Japan to reopen. But it's been really, really cool. We did not foresee this, and we are excited to go, but we've had some really cool opportunities to build into some relationships that we wouldn't have been able to build into, opportunities to let God speak to us in new ways. We've learned different things about God and about ourselves that we didn't know, and it's been really good for us to learn that. And then we've gotten opportunities to come speak at churches, so which has been really cool. One of the cool things about the Christian Missionary Alliance is Roger talked about the Great Commission Fund and giving there, and that's a big part of our funding as missionaries. And so we get about half of our funding through the Great Commission Fund, but the other half comes through individuals and families and churches like you guys. And so we get to have those personal relationships. Instead of just coming from a big fund, it gets to be from churches and families that we get to know and get to join our team. And so it's been really cool and encouraging to talk to families and churches about that. One of the really interesting things, when we first started doing our support raising, it was really intimidating because it felt like it was asking people to support our ministry. But we realized it's not about supporting our ministry. It's about asking people to join our ministry. And so we've gotten to ask people to come alongside of us, whether it's prayer or finances or other ways. People have been able to join our ministry. And so we're really excited to bring people in. So we will be around after church here. If people are feeling nudged by God to join our ministry in some way, come talk to us, because we would love to talk to you more about Japan. And we do have prayer cards as well. as well. But I want to just leave you with a couple points. Really two things. God speaks to us, and he wants to speak to you, but we do have to be intentional. We have to set aside the noise and distraction and listen. And when he speaks, it might be something hard. It might be telling you to do something that feels really uncomfortable, but there's blessing and reward in doing that thing that's uncomfortable. Second thing, be the Great Commission here now, right? You all have neighbors, you have friends, you have coworkers, whatever it is, that don't know the hope of Jesus, and they need the hope of Jesus just as badly as the Japanese people do. Be the Great Commission now. Go and serve in that way. Those are the things we want to encourage you today. But thank you so much for having us here, and thanks for your time.